You're parked behind a grocery store at 11 at night, seat reclined, blanket over your legs, trying to sleep where nobody notices you. A knock on the glass, a flashlight in your eyes. That's the moment I learned the hard way that half the things I did to survive in my truck were technically against the law in most of this country. I found out there are rules on the books in 44 states that can turn a man just trying to rest into a man facing 90 days in a cell. But here's what nobody tells you. The old-timers who lived out of wagons and rail cars beat every one of those rules with tricks that cost almost nothing. I dug up a 1939 relief bulletin that spells out how they did it, and by the end of this I'll hand you the one method that kept a man invisible and warm without spending a dime. This works even if all you've got right now is the truck and $40 to your name. I want to be honest with you before I go 1 inch further. For years, I did this the expensive way. I bought the fancy window covers off the internet. I paid for the campground spots. I handed over money for a gym membership just so I'd have a place to shower, and I told myself that was smart. It wasn't smart. It was me not knowing any better. And me not knowing any better is exactly what somebody was counting on. Because the truth is, everything I'm about to show you was common knowledge to men and women who had nothing during the hardest years this country ever saw, and it got quietly buried under a mountain of products you were told you had to buy. Let me start with the one that got me that knock on the window. Sleeping where you can be seen. I used to think the safest thing was a well-lit parking lot, out in the open, nothing to hide. That's backwards. And I paid for learning it backwards. In most cities, there are ordinances against sleeping in a vehicle on a public street, and a lot of them were written so vaguely that an officer decides on the spot whether you're resting or whether you're loitering. The old rail riders had a phrase for staying out of trouble. They called it reading the jungle being the camp near the tracks where they'd gather. The rule was simple. You never bed down where your presence forces somebody to make a decision about you. You find the place where you're nobody's problem. Here's how that turns into something you can do tonight. The trick isn't hiding better. It's belonging. A truck parked outside a 24-hour business looks like it belongs. A truck at a trailhead looks like a hiker's. A truck on a residential street at 2 in the morning looks like a question somebody has to answer, and when people have to answer questions about you, that's when the law gets called. I learned to think like the man who lived through the Depression, who knew that invisibility isn't darkness. Invisibility is fitting the picture so well that no eye stops on you. But belonging in the daylight is only half the battle, because the real danger comes after you fall asleep and you can't control what your own truck tells the world. That leads me straight to the window covers, and this is where I burned real money. I spent close to $60 on custom-cut reflective covers, the ones with the little suction cups, and I want to tell you exactly why that was a waste. The problem those covers solve isn't heat, it's the tell. A covered window at night screams that somebody's sleeping inside, and in a lot of jurisdictions, a visible attempt to live in your vehicle is the exact thing that gives an officer cause. So I was paying money to advertise the very thing I needed to hide. The people who figured this out first weren't campers. They were folks in the 1930s who slept in parked cars because they'd lost their homes, and a home economics circular out of the era mentioned a habit I've never seen sold in any store. They used dark fabric, hung on the inside, cut to sit an inch back from the glass. From outside it just reads as shadow, not a cover, not a curtain, just the ordinary black of an empty cab. You can do this with an old bed sheet dyed dark, or a section of moving blanket, or even black trash bags if that's all you have, though fabric breathes better and won't sweat you out. You clip it to the frame with binder clips from a dollar store, the little black ones, and you set it back off the glass so there's no bulge, no shine, no suction cup for a flashlight to catch. Total cost, if you buy nothing, is $0. If you buy the clips, $1. And it does something the $60 covers never did. It makes your truck look empty from the outside while you sleep warm inside it. But looking empty only protects you from the eyes. It does nothing about the second thing that gives a sleeper away, And this one nearly cost me an entire night of freedom. The engine. The heat. I used to run my truck for warmth, and I'd tell myself I'd just idle for 20 minutes and shut it off. That idling is illegal in a growing number of places, with fines attached, and worse than the fine is what it does to your fuel and your engine and your safety while you sleep. Carbon monoxide has killed people doing exactly what I was doing. So I went looking for how anybody stayed warm before a truck cab could be heated at the turn of a key. And what I found goes back a lot further than the Depression. It goes back to every teamster and stagecoach driver who ever spent a winter night in an unheated wagon. They understood something we forgot. You don't heat the space, you heat the man, and you trap what your own body already makes. A human body puts out heat like a small lamp burning all night long, and the whole trick is keeping that heat from escaping. The teamsters used hay. They'd pack straw thick under a blanket and around their legs, and the dead air in that straw held their warmth like a wall. You don't have hay, but you have the same principle sitting in your closet right now. Dead air is the insulator, not the blanket itself, but the still air the blanket traps. That's why one thick blanket loses to 3 thin ones with air between them every single time. Here's the poor man's version I use now, and it costs nothing if you already own the pieces. You put something under you before you put anything over you. Cold comes up from the seat and the floor of that truck harder than it comes from the air, because the metal under you pulls warmth straight out of your body. A folded blanket, a stack of clothes, a cheap foam pad, anything that puts dead air between your body and that cold metal does more for you than the fattest comforter laid on top. Then you layer loosely on top, never tight, because compressed insulation is dead insulation. You keep a knit cap on your head, and you eat something with a little fat in it before you sleep, because your body burns that fuel into heat for hours. That's it. No engine, no fine, no poison, just the same knowledge a wagon driver had 150 years ago. But staying warm and hidden still leaves the problem that got more people in trouble than any other, and it's the one nobody wants to talk about. Where you go to the bathroom, and where your water comes from. I'm not going to dress this up because pretending it isn't a problem is how people end up cited for public indecency, which in a lot of states is a far more serious charge than sleeping in a car. I spent money I didn't need to spend on this too, buying gallon jugs of water 3 at a time from the front of the store, paying a premium for the privilege of carrying my own weight in plastic. Let me tell you what the folks who travel light actually did, because it turns the whole thing around. For water, the drinking fountains and the spigots have been there the whole time, and there's a specific piece of knowledge that changes everything. Cemeteries. Almost every established cemetery has a water spigot, sometimes several, meant for people tending graves and flowers, and that water is potable and nobody questions a person filling a container there. Parks the same. The back of a hardware store, the side of a public building, campgrounds in the off-season. A collapsible container that folds flat when it's empty costs a few dollars and holds days of water, and it never marks you as somebody living rough the way 3 store-bought jugs rolling around your floorboards do. As for the other need, a wide-mouth container with a good lid and a bag of the crystals that turn liquid to gel, the same kind sold for the sick and the elderly, means you never have to step outside at the wrong moment and never have to break a law to answer a call of nature. That's dignity for the price of a jar. Now, I want to talk to you directly, the one watching this who's thinking all of this is fine for a man with a truck and a little cash to set himself up, but you don't have the little cash. Maybe you're not even in the truck yet. Maybe you're about to be. And the fear of it is sitting on your chest right now. This next part is built for you, because it costs nothing at all, and it's the thing I wish somebody had put in front of me on my worst night. It's the newspaper. I know how that sounds. But there's a reason the phrase for a homeless man in the Great Depression was that he covered himself with newspapers, and it wasn't a joke, and it wasn't just what was lying around. Newsprint is a real insulator. It's wood fiber, full of tiny air pockets, and layered flat against the body under your clothes, It traps your heat exactly the way that straw did for the Teamsters. A stack of newspaper stuffed under your shirt, across your chest and back, and packed around your legs inside your pants will hold body warmth through a night that would otherwise have you shaking. The relief workers in the 1930s knew it. There are accounts of men lining their coats with paper before winter set in, and it was free then, and it's free now. You can pull a newspaper out of a recycling bin. You can grab the free circulars stacked by every store entrance. It costs you nothing, needs no tools, and it's sitting within reach of almost anyone. And here's the layer that makes it work even better. Cardboard under you? Remember, the cold coming up from below is what steals your heat fastest. A flattened cardboard box laid across the seat or the floor before you lie down puts a wall of dead air between you and the metal, and cardboard is everywhere, free for the taking behind every business in the country. Newspaper on your body, cardboard beneath it. Together they are a heating system that has kept human beings alive for 100 years and costs exactly nothing. Nobody sells it because nobody can. But knowing paper keeps you warm still doesn't answer the biggest question of all, the one that decides whether you get to keep doing any of this or whether a knock on the window ends it. That knowledge didn't disappear because it stopped working, and if you want to go deeper into every one of these methods in one place, I put it all together for you. Everything covered in this video, and a great deal more that I couldn't fit here, is laid out in full in Poor Man's Edge, Poor Man Advanced, and Poor Man's System, 3 books written for exactly the person watching this right now, the one who refuses to keep paying for what his own hands and head can do. Everything in those books comes from the same places I've been pulling from old bulletins, forgotten manuals, the hard-won knowledge of people who survived without a dollar to spare. If any of this has been useful to you, those books are where the rest of it lives. You'll find them in the description below. Now, let's get back to the thing that decides whether you get to keep doing any of this at all. Staying legal, or more honestly, staying invisible enough that the law never becomes your problem. Because here's the thing that took me too long to understand. The rules against sleeping in vehicles, the idling bans, the loitering ordinances, they aren't enforced against people who look like they belong. They're enforced against people who look lost. A man who steps out of his truck at dawn clean, in a collared shirt, buying a coffee, is invisible. The same man rumpled, with jugs of water visible through his window and covers on the glass, is a target. The whole difference is presentation, and presentation is free. So let me give you the finale. The one method I found buried in a 1939 Federal Relief Bulletin that I have never once seen mentioned in all the truck living advice being sold today. It was written for transient men moving between work camps, and it described a practice the government workers had noticed among the most successful travelers, the ones who never got rounded up. They called it keeping a daytime face. And what it meant was this: the men who survived without trouble did not live in their vehicles. They stored their lives in their vehicles and lived in the public world. Here is exactly what that means for you this week. Everything that marks you as sleeping in that truck gets broken down and put away the moment you wake. The dark cloth comes off the windows and folds into a bag. The bedding goes into a duffel, not draped over the seat. The cab by 7 in the morning looks like the cab of a man who drives to a job, because a man who drives to a job is not breaking any law, and no officer wastes a morning on him. The bulletin put it plainly. The vagrant is arrested for how his vehicle looks in daylight, not for where he sleeps at night, and the men who understood that moved freely for years, while others were cited within a week. That's the whole secret, and it's why the products miss it entirely. You cannot buy your way to invisibility. The $60 covers make you more visible. The setup that looks like a cozy little home on wheels is the exact thing that draws the flashlight. The old transients survived by owning almost nothing and by making their truck testify to a normal life every single morning. A public library gave them a warm day and an address of sorts. A gym day pass or a truck stop shower kept them clean for less than the cost of that monthly membership I wasted my money on. and a face that said, "I belong here," did more to keep them out of jail than any lock or any cover ever could. I think about the men who wrote that down. Government workers in 1939, watching desperate people figure out how to stay free and quietly recording what worked so it wouldn't be lost. Then it was lost anyway. It got buried under 70 years of catalogs and gadgets telling you that surviving takes a purchase, when the people who actually survived the worst of it did it with newspaper and cardboard and a clean shirt and the wisdom to look like they belonged. That knowledge didn't disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because there was no money in it. So that's what I want you to carry out of here. Not a product, a way of thinking that was handed down from the wagon drivers to the rail riders to the men in the relief camps, and that somebody wrote down in 1939 so that you, tonight, could have it back. You are not a man who has to pay somebody to survive. You are a man who can do it himself, the way people always did before they were taught to reach for a wallet. You didn't lose your independence. It was quietly taken from you, one purchase at a time, and now you've got a piece of it back. If you're the kind of person who refuses to keep paying for what your own hands and your own head can do, you already belong here. I want you to do one thing for me. Tell me in the comments which one hit you hardest, the newspaper under your shirt or the cardboard under your body. And if you've ever spent a cold night in a vehicle, tell me where you were when you learned it. This audience doesn't speak up much, so I'm asking you plainly, leave that comment, because somebody scared and cold tonight is going to scroll down and your words might be the thing that gets them through. Subscribe if you want to keep recovering what people like us were never supposed to forget, because the next thing I'm digging into is how those same relief camps fed a grown man for pennies a day on a food most people throw straight in the trash. And once you see it, you'll never waste it again. Before you go, let me hand you two more things I found in that same bulletin, because they cost nothing and they matter more than any gadget. The first is about where you park in relation to the sun. The men in those relief camps who knew what they were doing pointed their windshields east when they bedded down. Not for the view, for the morning. The first sun of the day hits that big front glass and warms the cab 10 or 15 degrees before you even move, and on a cold morning that free warmth is the difference between a hard start and an easy one. It costs nothing to point a truck the right way. It just takes knowing to do it, and now you know. The second is quieter, and it saved more men than the warmth ever did. Routine. The bulletin noted that the travelers who lasted moved on a rhythm. Same time up, same time gone, never 2 nights in a row in the same spot, if that spot could raise a question. Because a truck seen once is scenery, but a truck seen 3 mornings running becomes a story somebody tells the police. You rotate. A business lot tonight, a trailhead tomorrow, a quiet stretch the night after. No pattern for anyone to notice, no face that becomes familiar for the wrong reason. That's the whole of it. Warmth from paper, insulation from cardboard, water from a cemetery spigot, a clean shirt at dawn, a windshield to the sun, and feet that keep moving. Not $1 required. Just the memory of how people survived before they were told they couldn't do it themselves. I've barely scratched the surface here. Inside the Thrifty Ways circle, I keep going right where this video stopped my invisible parking playbook. The spots I couldn't fit here, and you can ask me your own question. A real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be doing this alone. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen. And you can cancel anytime, one click.